Welcome, everyone. Simon Rosenberg from Hopium Chronicles. I'm here, not in my normal place in Washington. I'm visiting a friend for a couple of days just to get out of DC. I'm still working, but I just wanted to get out of the crazy city for a few days. I'm here with my very dear friend, Leon Krauze, who I'm going to let him introduce himself in a minute. But what I want to say about Leon and what we're going to talk about today is there is so much happening. I mean, the German elections, our new regime in Washington, the concern about backsliding and the erosion of our democracy. And Leon is a dear friend and one of the smartest guys that I know, and I think is going to bring very important perspective to this conversation. I'm really looking forward to this as a discussion because I have some things that I want to throw out there today, too, given the gravity of the moment. And Leon, welcome. Thanks for being with us today.
Simon, it's wonderful to join you and your community and Hopium. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, listen, why don't you introduce yourself to our family? I mean, we've known each other a long time and have had many wonderful conversations and dinners and things. But why don't you introduce yourself to our wonderful family?
Well, I'm very proud to be your friend. That's the first thing I should say. And again, thank you for having me on Hopium. I'm a Mexican journalist. I emigrated to the United States almost 15 years ago. I've had two passions in life. My first professional passion was soccer, a passion that we also share. I began my career way back, probably more than 30 years ago now, as a sports journalist. A friend of mine once told me that every career in journalism should begin with an act of outrage. Mine was fairly trivial. My favorite coach for the Mexican national team was fired, and I wrote a piece, sent it to a couple of newspapers. It got published, and that's how my career began. But then I quickly evolved into my two other passions, basically American politics. While my friends were out there partying, I was a deep political nerd in Mexico City, watching Al Gore debate Ross Perot on NAFTA. If you can imagine the scene, there I was watching from Mexico City on CNN. I think Larry King was moderating, and then immigration, the Hispanic community, the Latino community, that brought me to the United States. I worked for Univision for well over a decade. First in Los Angeles, 11 wonderful years, then a couple of years here in Miami, where I'm at the moment, and I'm a columnist for the Washington Post.
Yeah, and the reason, Leon, that I asked you to come on today, it was that you wrote a piece for the Post that I shared in Hopium a couple of days ago, which reflected upon the experience of Mexico under the last leader, López Obrador, and things that you felt were important that the Democrats needed to learn from the experience of what Mexico has just gone through. So can you just take us through the key points of that wonderful piece?
Thank you for sharing it on Hopium, by the way. Well, my main argument, and I've been thinking about this a lot, Simon, is that, well, first of all, I think that one factor that is very, very rarely taken into consideration when you count the list of factors of why Donald Trump won, I think one factor that sometimes is not analyzed deeply enough is the fact that he never left the scene. I don't think there's a similar case in American politics. The fact that Donald Trump refused to leave the stage. From the very first day, he became the de facto nominee for the Republican Party. He was anointed the leader of the party almost immediately, and he refused to leave the stage, becoming a shadow president for Joe Biden, criticizing every single decision that Biden made, exploiting every single mistake over 4 long years. This had never happened, as far as I know, in American politics or the modern history of American politics, but it certainly happened in Mexico. And it explained the rise of Andrés Manuel López Obrador. When he lost his first election in 2006, he refused to leave the stage. He remained there. He even declared himself the legitimate president of Mexico, very similar to Trump. And he played the role of shadow president for Felipe Calderón for 6 long years. Then the next election came along, and López Obrador, of course, had had already become the de facto candidate for the left, and he was the candidate for the left and lost again, now by a wider margin. And he did exactly the same thing. He refused to leave the stage. He questioned the legitimacy of Enrique Peña Nieto, became the shadow president for 6 long years, and then finally won. And when he won, what he chose to do was remarkable from the perspective of political communication. The first thing he chose to do, he decided to do, was to hold a daily press conference. Rain or shine, whatever happened, he held a daily press conference. And what ended up happening with a daily press conference, Simon, is that he became the narrator in chief of Mexican life. No matter the topic, López Obrador had an opinion. He called into this press conference a bunch of pseudo journalists who asked him very comfortable questions. I don't know if this sounds fairly familiar, with a few exceptions that were immediately subjected to a barrage of, let's call it criticism, although it could be quite more savage than that on social media. And slowly but surely, he became the owner of the narrative in Mexican political life and Mexican life in general. What concerned me the most when I think of the example in the current moment in the United States is that Mexican opposition froze. It never found a way to offer a counter weight to this constant owning of the narrative that López Obrador displayed every single day. Not one single figure emerged that could actually reply to López Obrador's daily press conferences. And the result is that López Obrador's chosen successor won handily. He ended up owning the stage. And what I suggest in this piece is that the Democratic Party should learn from this lesson and very quickly find a way to offer a counter narrative to Trump's very clear intention in the second term to own the narrative. It is not a coincidence, I'll wrap it up here, that he has held, I think, Simon, 27 or 28 press conferences. He's there all the time. This is in contrast to his first term, in which he rarely held press conferences. He rarely talked to the press outside of informal settings. This is not a coincidence. He's trying to follow the López Obrador playbook, even if he doesn't know it's the López Obrador playbook. By the way, I think he might know it's the López Obrador playbook because the two of them are close friends. But even if he doesn't, he's following it. And the opposition in the United States is making the same mistake the opposition in Mexico made. He's letting him own the stage when they should offer a counter narrative. That's my argument.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting what you're saying. I think that Trump began the daily press conference or frequent press conference during COVID was when he began, his whole strategy around this stuff changed when he was still in the White House, when he was going to the podium, right,
Correct.
in the press room, and which he did frequently, and he often embarrassed himself. But to your point, he used it to drive the daily discourse in the country. And driving the daily discourse in the United States has been a central objective of the right-wing ecosystem for a long time. And so now he not only has the bully pulpit of the White House, but he has this vast, mature, ecosystem behind him, amplifying all of this. And your point about the sort of the stooges who ask the questions, the White House is actually in the spirit of letting independent media in,
Mm-hmm.
is letting
Mm-hmm.
in all these right-wing media sources who are asking questions now in the daily press conference. Not there isn't a commensurate admission of people who aren't ideologically aligned. And so they've actually created a greater pool of those softball questions that, like you mentioned, that, this is exactly what they're doing right now. So what do you think, Leon, this could look like, right? You've been in media for a long time, right? You were a television anchor, the business. What would this look like? Is it a morning press conference that the House and Senate Democrats authorize every day? Is it a single set of narrators and spokesperson? Can it be a rotating group of people? I mean, what's just generally, I mean, riff for a little bit about what you think it could actually look like.
By the way, independent media is more or less the label that López Obrador and his group used to justify the presence of these fake journalists who threw softball questions at the president. So it's so very similar. It's eerily similar, and I would argue, Simon, by the way, and this might be up for debate, but I would argue that if Trump had kept those daily press conferences during COVID. Of course, he said so many insane things back then, and the moment was so surreal that I mean, I might be wrong, but I think that it was a political mistake on his part to end those daily press conferences because he was owning the conversation. That's how powerful presence, not his presence necessarily, but presence is in our current cultural moment. That's why he's doing it now, and why López Obrador did it back then. I think that listen, the Democratic Party versus the Republican Party is certainly a diverse community of political voices. Let's call it that. So I know it's tough to find one spokesman, but it doesn't have to be one spokesman or spokeswoman. In the piece, I suggest, for example, a rotating group of senators, congressmen, congresswomen, or governors, depends on the topic at hand. For example, with Ukraine, I know that there are great voices out there in the Democratic Party who could come on after Trump speaks, or maybe the morning after, or whatever, and offer the party's view and reaction to what Trump said and expose his lies, his borderline illegal or fairly or frankly illegal decisions that he has announced or taken. The point is to offer a reaction. When the terrible accident happened at Reagan in Washington, Trump owned the narrative. Former Secretary of Transportation Buttigieg offered some points of view here and there on Twitter and in a couple of interviews, I think, but there wasn't a cohesive answer to the insanity of what Trump was putting forth in the national narrative. And I think that if you find this team of voices within the Democratic Party and then have the discipline of always answering every single one of Trump's decisions or comments. Simon, let me just go back to one quick thing. I think one of the main discoveries of the Obama campaign back in the day, I think this was the first campaign with McCain versus McCain, was I think someone in his team, you might know who, had the idea of opening a website called fightthesmears.com. I remember it very, very well. This was in contrast to the strategy that John Kerry followed, or lack of strategy that John Kerry followed with Swift voting, in which he wouldn't stoop to the level of answering or addressing these rumors, and then he lost. Obama took the different route, and every smear, quote unquote smear, or without the quotes, he addressed. I think that's what the Democratic Party should do urgently. I would argue.
Two thoughts on that. I do think that, just given the nature of our political system, the notion of there being a single spokesperson is probably not practical. And that, I have called on and Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, our leaders, to create some kind of political and communication superstructure with the DNC that would include a daily press conference that I think should be rotating. To your point, it could be a group of senators and House members that go every Thursday, and another group that go every Wednesday, and that there's actual prep, right? They have time to prep, because the key is to prep, right? There has to be preparation and strategy and thoughtfulness around this, right? And a plan, right? Like everything we do in our business, you can't operate impulsively. You've got to have a strategy. And I think that, as somebody who worked in the war room for Clinton in '92, I mean, the whole premise of that campaign is that we had to own every news cycle. We had to go on offense, and to lay our story, tell our story. Clinton had a very clear agenda, and then we had to respond. And there was a premise that any attack that went unanswered would stick. And so we challenged everything in like Obama did, as you pointed out, that we didn't let any a statement or attack on us go unchallenged, because the theory of our whole campaign in the war room was that any attack that was made that was not rebutted would stick. And there has been the Biden world had a different view about these things, right? They believe that the news cycle could kind of move on and people would move on to other things. And I think that we're just, to your point, I think that we have to, I have been very vociferous and have also had private conversations with the leaders' teams about the need to create this new communication superstructure that's very much along the lines of what you're describing. And it just has to happen. Like, I mean, there just isn't really, we won't be competitive. And what I tell people who keep talking about the midterm elections, we're going to win or lose the midterm elections over what happens over the next 6 to 8 weeks, right? Not what happens next year. We have to not let Trump, completely define the entire terms of engagement here. And we have to fight. And this has been a little bit of I will say, as somebody who's been in this business and grew up, my formative experience was working in this deeply combative and aggressive communication shop in the war room. I've been a little bit surprised, perhaps is the word, that our team doesn't understand the necessity of everything you're describing.
Hmm. Uh, while I was listening to you, I kept going back to that Mexican example. The main problem for the opposition in Mexico was that there never was a López Obrador for López Obrador. There never was a constant opposition figure for López Obrador. I understand that there's not one single opposition figure in the United States, and there shouldn't be, because the Democratic Party is very diverse, but in that diversity lies its strength, I would argue. There are, again, voices that could speak to almost any topic eloquently. But the thing is, you have to do it with discipline, and you have to make it newsworthy. Uh, us in the media, Simon, we will cover it. I'm sure the Times will cover it. Of course, sure, the Washington Post will cover it. If there is a rebuttal, every single day rebuttal that is, like you say, well prepared, well thought out, to compete with the narrative that Trump is offering in his chaotic and scandalous but very effective way, now almost every single day. Again, in contrast with his first term, this is incredibly concerning, because I'm absolutely sure there's a strategy to it. I mean, you don't have to be a
Well,
genius to
let me
figure it
give you
out.
let me give you an example of that. I mean, there are days now where the press secretary, who's only in her 20s, right, is doing her, will do an availability outside of the press room in order to not interfere with Trump's message that day, right? Like
There you go.
they no, there's been a huge, they are doing what you say, right? Which is that they're not downgrading the press secretary. She's still doing those events, but that they are supplemental to what he's doing in ways that are different from how, for example, the Biden administration, we could go into the details on this, but when he's speaking, I mean, he gave a speech in Miami, right? Was it on Friday or Thursday of last week, where he spoke for an hour? And he's doing, he's going on and on and on, covering topic after topic after topic, right? About men playing in women's, men playing in women's sports. I mean, everything. He's got, to your point, he's got an opinion about everything, right? And he is dominating the discourse in a way that is, the way I've described this in my own writing is that, Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries now have the entire communications responsibility of a presidential election, of the White House, without those tools, without those staff. And Trump now has the entire right-wing ecosystem in the United States that is superior to ours. And he's got the White House, and he's got Trump himself, right? Just in the power of his ability, his shamelessness to get up and say, to change positions, to say anything without, he has no shame whatsoever. And how long, so just tactically, when Lopez Obrador did these press conferences. How long did they last? Oftentimes, Leon.
A long time. I mean, this follows. I mean, 2 3 hours at times, whatever was needed, you know. And the scene was majestic because this is also important, right? He in the Palacio Nacional, the National Palace. There's this big hall, and he would come on, and every single day, no matter what happened, he was there. He became, and I think this phrase is very important, Simon, the narrator in chief of Mexican life. Almost every topic he touched upon. And it was very powerful because just like Trump, he was a very effective and ruthless and brutal communicator. Um, constantly attacking the press and his opponents. He single-handedly went after the opposition candidate once she became the official opposition candidate, and he played a big role, by the way. It was illegal for him to meddle in the election, but he didn't care. He once said, "Don't tell me that the law is the law." Does that sound familiar
Yeah,
with
yeah.
Trump? You know, it's the similarities are many, and but also the vulnerabilities. And I wanted to get to this. López Obrador was vulnerable. He spewed lies, lie upon lie upon lie. I think the final count is on the tens of thousands of lies over 6 years. He exaggerated. He just lied continuously. But no one called him on his lies. There was no one there on the other side to raise their hand and say, that's a lie. Of course, on Twitter it happened. Journalists tried to do it. We tried to do it, but we're not political figures. We are journalists. In the end, pretty powerless, sadly. There was no one from the political sphere who dared do it or had the imagination to do it or the discipline to do it. Trump is vulnerable in the same way. He's scandalous. He lies. He's appealing to a percentage of Americans, but he's vulnerable, just like every person who lies is vulnerable. But you have to offer a counter narrative. You have to point out the lies and the illegalities, because if you don't do it, then they become narrative, and when they become narrative, they become truth.
Well, and I think one of the ways you're seeing that vulnerability be exploited, and Rob Shapiro, the economist that I've worked with for many, many years, had an interesting observation a few weeks ago about how hard it was going to be, how, Germany had only been a democracy for 10 years. Mexico has had its own interesting relationship to, democratic processes. But here, we've been a democracy for almost 250 years. The tradition is ingrained. And I think that what you're starting to see, I think my own view about the arc of all of this is that it was about 10 days ago, 12 days ago, where Trump sort of did two outrageous things back to back that made it very clear where they were headed. One was that the whole few days around the Munich conference, where he essentially switched sides in the Ukraine war and abandoned Ukraine and Europe for Putin, which was just it came so swiftly, it was so forceful, it was so outrageous. Vance's speech at the Munich conference, and
Mm.
then the firing of the probationary workers, which was this sort of savage attack on the capacity of our government to function, and the greatest betrayal of working Americans that we've ever seen. And I think those two things coming at the same time created an unbelievable shock in our system. But it was a shock also that went across the whole country. I mean, these people are getting laid off, and we're in Wichita, and they were in Miami, and they're in Austin, Texas. I mean, they're in every part of the country, and local press coverage of these sort of savage mistreatment of patriotic Americans who are working for their country started showing up. And you could feel something change I felt last week in
Mm-hmm.
in the response of the American people, and of also Republicans. And I think you're seeing real cracks now start to emerge as his madness and his extremism is become, and his savage attack on what I call the America of the Four Freedoms has become undeniable now, right? There's no way to put lipstick on this pig anymore. There's no way to create some kind of soft version of what he's doing in terms of the harm that he's doing to the country and to our standing in the world and to our security. I mean, we're
Mm.
literally the new German chancellor. Dogs are welcome here, Leon. Is that the new German chancellor last night talked about how now Europe needs to start planning a future without America and the American alliance. And so I do think that part of what started happening in the last 10 days is that one of the other narrators in this story is going to be the American people, and that the American people who have started to rise up and protest and go to these town hall meetings. I was at a public event on Tuesday night last week with 350 people in Bethesda, Maryland, with some local politicians, and the spirit and passion and fear and outrage and anger in that room, right? The intensity of that gathering, I could feel it. And you can feel this rising up, this sort of the the American people themselves are like, you got to be shitting me that we're really, dealing with this stuff, and that you're really trying to get rid of our democracy, which is one of the greatest creations of human beings in all of human history, right? And for what, right? For you and Elon to, act like Russian plunderers and plunder the treasury. And so I do think that one of the other narratives in our system that may be different from Mexico also is going to be the voice of everyday people who I
Mhm.
think are really starting to take responsibility. I mean, I feel it in my own in this hopium community. I mean, people are aware that what you're starting to see in my community, Leon, is more people saying, Simon, I've been making calls to my senators and my congressmen, but now I'm emailing 20 of my friends and getting them to do it too. And then all of a sudden, then the opposition movement is now building itself, right? It's creating itself every day through individuals engaging more people in whatever activity they take, protesting against Tesla, right? Being an information warrior, as I call it. And what I've been doing a lot is trying to help the Americans and people in the Hopium community, and frankly, our politicians, about what's required of them now, right? That they're not just legislators and executives, but they're communicators and influencers and leaders of an opposition and information warriors, and that they need to take that responsibility seriously now to help prevent Trump from becoming the narrator in chief, as
Hmm.
you're describing. To me, I think the way this is really going to happen, in addition to the rotating leaders, is you're going to see an explosion of citizen engagement all across the country, particularly as things get warmer in the US, where their voices are going to be heard. And it's going to be an
Hmm.
extraordinary challenge to the ability, because this was always an untapped power. I wrote about this in the New Republic in a cover story a year ago, that the Biden campaign needed to reinvent the campaign around having 6 million information warriors by their side, to think of a campaign now not as 20 sweaty kids drinking Red Bull, producing TikTok videos, but 6 million people, proud patriots ready to go to work. Those 6 million people are starting to go to work, and it's exciting, I think.
I agree with you, and it's very clear that the public is reacting. It's also clear that Trump and Musk have overplayed their hands. But I would suggest we should not overestimate the rationality of voters. I think there's much to be done to strengthen that building that is beginning to uh, to be built. I go back, Simon, to the moment that the first moment that I was really concerned for the future of American democracy, and that was the moment in the I think it was first presidential debate in which Trump was asked whether or not he would acknowledge the results of the election, the 2020 election, and he basically said no. Uh, that that precise moment, immediately. By the way, another one of the basic Lopez Obrador playbook strategies. Um, that precise moment, I remember thinking, the people who believe that American democracy exists and B, has worked, have to begin explaining why that's the case. Many friends of ours, by the way, from both sides of the political aisle, and friends of mine in media, told me I was exaggerating. I was not exaggerating. Turns out many people didn't really understand, and still maybe don't understand, why American democracy does work, why fraud in American democracy simply does not exist, at least not in the massive scale that Trump insists happened in 2020 and still insists happened, even though I think when he looks at himself in the mirror, he knows that was not the case, and this was just a matter of narrative manipulation, right? So that I think that example of how for 4 years the, let's call it, powers that be did not explain frequently enough or powerfully enough or clearly enough why American democracy actually works, how the system works, why we vote the way we vote, why states count the way they count, why votes are reported the way they are reported, why the electoral college is what it is. All of this sort of boring stuff should have been explained time and time again to offer a counterweight to the narrative, to Trump's narrative. That's why I think that what we're seeing now, we have to explain, and by we, I mean people who believe in freedom and democracy. And I am a journalist. First and foremost, I have no political leaning other than my own personal vote. That is my personal vote, but I have no political leaning. But I do believe that part of what journalists should do is protect freedom and democracy. I do believe that as a basic principle of what we do. So when I use the plural, I mean all of us who believe in freedom and democracy is frankly explain the illegalities, the lies, call out the lies, have the courage, like the Times just did just recently, right? To use the verb lie. It's important to be very clear as journalists and in the political sphere, Simon. There cannot be a vacuum. Silence is not an option, because again, then narrative becomes takes a hold of, like with the whole insanity of fraud. It takes a hold of the national conscience, and it's very difficult then to extricate it as like a tumor from what has now become the American soul.
Well, Leon, as I sit here, I think about the fact that in 2012, right before, in the fall, you reached out to me, or it was late summer, I guess, and asked me to write a piece for Letras Libres, a magazine that your family is involved in Mexico, an intellectual journal in Spanish, based in Mexico City. The piece that I wrote for you was about the Republican Party and about my worry that the Republican Party was on a descent into what I called in those days, sort of innocently, a reactionary kind of standing, essentially arguing that we were witnessing in the United States a warning sign that one of our two political parties, even in 2012, was beginning to suggest that they were going to leave the democratic system that we were in. And there were even, and I wrote that piece, which I'm going to share in this Opium piece today. And it is amazing, to your point. One of the things that I discussed with the Biden world was having somebody like Michael Beschloss come into the White House and become a communicator on behalf of the government of the United States about democracy and about how it should work, and what was, and threats to it as a official function of the government of the United States itself, right? I mean, listen, I think one of the great crises that we have in the Democratic Party right now, and I know this from having worked at the DCCC in 2018, is that our pollsters and our data people are telling our politicians all the time to not talk about this stuff, and to talk about inflation and the economy and healthcare and Medicaid and the kitchen table issues. And it's been going on since Trump arrived. It was clearly something that dictated and drove some of the strategy of the Harris campaign. We ran almost no negative ads. One of the most remarkable charts I have about Trump is that he, from 2022, his favorabilities and his job, were very low. And over the next 2 years, his favorabilities just went up and up and up and up and up, as if there was no Democratic campaign. Like literally, as if you just saw this slow incremental improvement in his standing and his rehabilitation that happened in front of our eyes, as if there was nothing challenging it, because there actually wasn't. The Harris campaign didn't run lots of negative ads against in the way that we would normally do. And Chris LaCivita, who ran the campaign for Trump, has commented publicly multiple times that he was stunned that they didn't come after Trump harder during the general election. It was something they were anticipating. And the reason I raise this is that we have to learn from that about this current moment. And
Mhm.
our leaders right now are talking about prices being too high and Medicare and Trump giving handouts to his billionaire friends. And they're not talking about this savage attack on our democracy or the realignment with Russia. And because there is some set of data bros and these data mystics, the data priesthood, that have convinced our democratic leadership, even though, by the way, it didn't work in the election, right? That convinced them in maintaining that we need to stay on kitchen table issues, why the fucking republic is burning. And we're at a point where there's going to have to be some really major come to Jesus in the family about this thing. Because look, I got shouted down in 2018. In 2018, I tried to make, as part of my job as a strategist, the radicalism of Trump. And, we were told in the polling that's not what people wanted to talk about. So we never mentioned Trump in the midterm elections in 2018. We ended up winning by 8.5 points. And so perhaps it was the right strategy. But the point is that if you don't make the argument, you can't expect people to know anything. If you don't tell them something, right? If you can't score unless you shoot, right? There is this fundamental thing in our family right now where we become risk adverse to pushing new and difficult narratives that are necessary in order to preserve and save our democracy. And we go sort of back to this comfortable place of kitchen table issues. And it's almost become like a mania in our family, right? To get up every day and look what's going on in America, particularly after the German, thank God we had a good result in the German elections. But to look at all of this and to think that the most important conversation that you should be having as a political leader in America is about the price of eggs is fucking crazy. I'm sorry, and our leaders have an obligation and a responsibility to talk to the American people about our security and safety, about the preservation of our democracy, to not be strategically silent, but to be strategically loud, to your point. And we are being beaten in the loudness game badly. And there's an urgent necessity. Sorry for that ramble there.
No, no, no,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
I
But go
I
ahead.
agree.
Yeah, we're hitting time. I didn't even really get to the German election last night, which ended up going better than we expected, and certainly was a loss for Elon and for JD Vance and their attempt to sort of build up the AfD in Germany. But why don't you land the plane here, Leon? Bring us home, and just offer some final thoughts. And I'm really, I'm going to bring you back from time to time because we only really started our conversation today, Leon. This was just the beginning.
Well, it's always
Yeah,
wonderful, and this is a way for us, whether or not cameras are
I
involved,
know.
and I'd be delighted to come back.
Yeah,
Simon, I think that I mean you hit the nail on the head, as you usually do. I think the range of issues that Trump offers for a counter narrative is so long. I mean, the list is so long. Uh, and I think that the list gets longer every day. But the fact that there's this growing outrage at what the man does and says is undeniable. But politically, I think it's really insufficient. And I speak from experience. This is what we went through in Mexico. Every single day was worse, and López Obrador kept pushing the goalposts farther and farther away, and something that would have been absolutely abnormal and horrifying and career ending for other politicians turned out to be just another day at the office. The whose fault was that? Was it López Obrador's fault? Not really. Of course, he was immoral and should have known better as the president of Mexico. Um, but in the end, it was the opposition and the media, and of course, Mexican citizenry in general, who should have pushed back. Um, and I think that's the role that the media should have now, and the Democratic Party as the only, and that's another advantage when you think of Mexico. There's many opposition parties, basically 2, 3, 4 opposition parties. Here, there's just one. So it's on the Democratic Party to build an effective, disciplined counter narrative to the long list of things, issues that Trump either gets into, tries to go into, does, or says. The list is so long. He is vulnerable as any man who has this style of communicating and of governing, let's call it that, is. But you have to make it so. If you don't share with the voters why something is wrong, why something is illegal, why something is a lie, uh, then uh, then uh, then you're doing a disservice to your own cause. And I really think that we should never overestimate here or anywhere else voters' levels of information, Simon. Normally, we're talking about low information voters in general. Even voters who are very informed are really not that informed. You have to inform them. You have to form public opinion. There's just no other way, and you have to do it urgently.
Well, and one of the things we talk about at Hopium is that, and
You
I
do
and
it.
well, but I wrestle with this, having produced what, I run what people are calling a newsletter, right? And what I've had, as somebody who's a former journalist, myself, I talk in the Hopium community about the necessity of not following the new, as I call it, of meaning that, of being chasing the new. That's the phrase I've been using. That part of what Trump does and what Lopez Obrador did was to force everyone to chase the new, right? Every day there was 6, 7 new things that he said, that he did, that then the media would go chase those things, because the news business is in chasing the new. That's actually their job. It's new news, right? And we, on our side, have to stay more focused on what's important as opposed to news, right? And I
I
often
agree.
say, yeah, and I often say that Hopium is an import letter, not a newsletter, that I try every day to share what I think is most important. Because in essence, what's happening now is there is one story. And the story and the narrative is that Donald Trump is attempting to destroy the America of the four freedoms, the global rules-based order abroad and our democracy here at home. And that each day there is a new wrinkle on it, or a new chapter, or a new iteration of it. But the story is what matters, right? The story of what he's doing. And what I try to do at Hopium is I don't try to chase the new. I don't want to spend my time writing about the 7 new injuries and abuses of Trump each day. I don't think it's productive. I mean, I think we have to be aware of it, but I don't think we have to live in it. We have to stay in this place of import and strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
then we've got to fight that, right? I mean, we've got to, as you pointed out, and I think the way you've described this about the counter narrative, right, or owning the narrative, is really important. His narrative is that he's making America great again. Our narrative should be that he is the great betrayer, that no one has betrayed American democracy the way that he has. And that he's Donald the weak, not Donald the strong. I mean, there's ways we have to go at this, but what we're doing is we're reacting to his attack on the America of the four freedoms by talking about the price of eggs. And it's almost become comical, right? In my view, how divorced the current understanding is of what we have to do in, unless we're comfortable with the democracy being dismantled in front of our eyes, right? Which is part of what, we're seeing. The courts are doing a
Mm.
lot of heavy lifting right
Mm.
now for us. Federalism, by the way, another break against this kind of politics is our very federal system, right? That states, governors and attorney generals have legal responsibility to take care of people in their states. And our system
Another
is,
important difference with Mexico, by the
well,
way.
and with virtually every country in the world, by the way. I mean, we have a remarkably federal system here that is unusual. There are no governors in England, for example, right? They don't have these interim bodies. There's often the federal, the state, and then localities. And we have this other thing in the middle, these democratically held states that are providing this additional break for now, right? For now on.
Mexico does have states, but nowadays, like in the old PRI's time,
Yeah.
they follow the leader, they follow what the center, what the capital, what the president says, whether it be Lopez Obrador or now Claudia Sheinbaum. So it's a fake federalism.
Okay, brother. I mean, we could go all day. I love you, man. And thank you for your incredible work. Thank you for staying in the game despite, um, you know, uh, your own experience with the growing power of the oligarchy in America. I love you, man. And just keep fighting. And I'll share this piece. I'm also going to share the original Letras Libres piece that I wrote back in
Please do.
2012, which is, which I'm really proud of. It was one of the most important things probably I've ever written in my career, long before Hopium. Want to share that with the Hopium community, and keep fighting, brother.
Thank you so much, Simon. Thank you for having me on, and glad to be back anytime. And I hope to see you soon, man.
Okay, take care. See you, everybody. I'll be back soon. Bye bye.